and welcome to FISM News. I'm Renata Kiss. And on tonight's program, Trump and others react to his immunity ruling. Meanwhile, Hezbollah continues receiving support from Iran, and border crossings drop to a 3-year low. But before we get into our coverage for the day, I'd like to introduce you to my co-host who will be stepping in for Samuel Case, and that's FISM's Ian Patrick. Welcome, Ian.
Thank you so much, Rennie. It's an honor to be doing the news aside with you again. And I have to say, I'm excited to hear about these reactions to the immunity ruling. I know it was definitely a big deal in the political world.
Yes, definitely. So let's start with that. Former President Donald Trump is seeking to overturn his hush money trial conviction with his newly earned immunity protections. Donald Trump claimed victory over his January 6 trial yesterday after the Supreme Court ruled that former presidents have broad immunity from prosecution. Now, the former president's lawyers are arguing that the same rule can apply to his hush money conviction. But since his indictment dates back to the time when he was only a candidate, his lawyers will likely argue that the evidence presented by Trump's prosecutors came from the time he was president. It remains to be seen if Judge Juan Merchan will take up the motion. But the deadline for post-trial motions has passed, so he may suggest Trump's team bring the case as part of the appeals process.
Meanwhile, the Democrat reaction to the ruling is less than enthusiastic. In fact, New York Representative Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez is taking action on her displeasure with it. In a post on X made yesterday, AOC indicated that she intends to file articles of impeachment against the Supreme Court. Her reason for doing so is because the court has become consumed by a corruption crisis beyond its control, and those are her words. She also says that the immunity ruling represents an assault on American democracy. Now, AOC did not specify which justices would be the target of this impeachment, but it's widely suspected that it would at least include some, if not all, of the more conservative-leaning justices. The House will be in recess until July 8th, and if AOC does file her impeachment articles, it would likely go to the Republican-led House Judiciary Committee for review. Meanwhile, President Biden also commented on the ruling, saying that it set a dangerous precedent.
No one is above the law, not even the President of the United States. Supreme Court decision on presidential immunity, that fundamentally changed for all practical purposes. Today's decision almost certainly means that there are virtually no limits on what a president can do. This is a fundamentally new principle, and it's a dangerous precedent.
Meanwhile, yesterday, the Supreme Court ruled that a North Dakota truck stop could sue the Federal Reserve. In a 6-3 decision, Justice Amy Coney Barrett ruled that the business was allowed to seek relief against the Federal Reserve over regulations dictating how much businesses have to pay banks when customers use debit cards for purchases. The court found that individuals who have been harmed by the Federal Reserve are entitled to judicial review. The Justice Department had argued that Corner Post truck stop should not be allowed to sue the Federal Reserve because the 6-year statute of limitations had expired. Justices Kagan, Sotomayor, and Jackson dissented. Elsewhere, the Supreme Court chose not to rule on challenges to social media laws in Texas and Florida. In a unanimous decision, the case was remanded to lower federal courts, citing an improper analysis of the First Amendment issue. The states were sued by technology industry group NetChoice after both passed laws that barred social media platforms from banning users for political viewpoints.
Well, the Supreme Court has certainly been busy, but let's move elsewhere in politics, where the House Judiciary Committee on Monday filed suit against Attorney General Merrick Garland over his refusal to provide the committee with access to audio tapes of President Biden. House Republicans accused Garland of illegally blocking access to taped interviews of President Biden and special counsel Robert Hur. The suit is the latest attempt to force the DOJ to turn over these tapes after the House voted to hold Garland in contempt for his refusal to comply with a congressional subpoena. Republicans have accused Garland of withholding the tapes over concerns that they would show that President Biden has cognitive impairment. Following his interview with the president, Hur declined to bring charges of mishandling classified information against the president. And Hur said that his decision was based on his belief that a jury would likely perceive Biden to be an elderly man with a poor memory. House Speaker Mike Johnson told reporters that the goal is ultimately not to embarrass the president, but just to get down to the facts.
Meanwhile, Secretary of State Antony Blinken came to President Biden's defense yesterday after his disastrous debate performance last week. Blinken echoed the Democrat response that one bad night doesn't mean his presidency has been ineffective.
The world knows, the world has experienced over 3.5 years, not one night, is exactly the kind of leadership that he's brought to bear on problems that are common for so many countries, particularly so many of the democracies around the world. And as I've seen it, again, going around the world, there's a desire, there's a thirst for American engagement, for American leadership. Even when we have disagreements with countries, they still want us in this and even leading to try to get to a better place.
He added that foreign allies have overall liked Biden's policy choices.
What I'm seeing, what I'm hearing is, again, people are looking at the last 3.5 years. They're looking at policies. They're looking at policy choices. And for the most part, they like the choices and the policies that this president's pursuing.
But others argue that it was exactly Biden's policies that have proven to be weak in the eyes of foreign adversaries. Here's former National Security Council Senior Director Robert Greenway with his reaction to Blinken's comments.
He's right in this sense that it was not Thursday night's debate that concluded, that allowed our adversaries to conclude that Biden was not in control, and that when he was, that bad decisions were made and have been made ever since. I think now all we've done is accelerate the entropy because they're convinced now that he is not in control, not from 10 in the morning to 4 in the afternoon, but not at all. And so I think that we're likely to see a continuation of those bad policies, and unfortunately it's going to accelerate.
And while we're discussing Biden, it seems as though his fellow Democrats are looking to solidify his promise to stick through this election cycle. According to a report from Bloomberg, the Democratic National Committee is floating the possibility of moving its formal nomination process up to as early as July 21st. That day is reportedly when the convention's Credentials Committee will meet virtually, and that is usually to finalize any other procedures before the party actually convenes in Chicago on August 19th of this year. The Democrat Party had already planned to nominate Biden, given that he's succeeded in the primary elections from this year, but moving the deadline has many suspecting that it's an attempt to silence calls for the president to remove himself from the ballot. Calls to replace Biden increased following his rather lackluster debate performance on Thursday of last week, and it's something that we've certainly covered extensively here at FISM News. Now, if this new date of July 21st is accepted, it would come only days after former President Donald Trump would have accepted the Republican nomination for the upcoming election as well. And when we come back, we'll take a look at some international news and more, so stay tuned.
I actually called the clinic thinking that it was an abortion clinic. I knew that at the time my partner wasn't going to be involved. I did want SUSAT, but I was having financial problems, and I was like, I don't need an appointment. They're like, just come in and we'll help you. And so I went in, and yeah, that practically changed my life. I had not been sleeping in. I remember like being able to sleep that night because I knew that like something was gonna happen. I was able to carry Suzette full term and have her. I'm extremely happy that I did not get an abortion. I don't think I would be here today, or my daughter. I don't think I would ever sacrifice as much as I did, because I feel that I did it for her. And if it wasn't that people that supported me, I don't think I would have ever been here.
There are moments in life that define us. Choices determine the courses we take. Choices that create life, or those that save a life. And some make life worthwhile. There are decisions to stay or to go, to remain the same or to grow. Sometimes we pray and make peace. Other times we take a stand for what we believe. In celebration, mourning, triumph, and defeat, we are invested in every decision we seek. Despite differences, we have one thing in common: the desire to do all for the glory of God. Keep your wallet aligned with your heart and your investments in harmony with your faith. Timothy Plan, biblically responsible mutual funds, ETFs, and retirement plans. Before investing, carefully consider a fund's investment objective, risks, charges, and expenses contained in the prospectus available at timothyplan.com. Read carefully before investing.
And welcome back to FISM News. I'm Renata Kiss. Well, let's start our international coverage with a lawsuit related to the October 7 attacks. In a landmark case, the Anti-Defamation League sued Iran, Syria, and North Korea for the country's alleged support of Hamas. The lawsuit represents 125 victims, including American citizens. According to the Times of Israel, the ADL accused the countries of providing financial, military, and tactical support to Hamas. Here's ADL CEO Jonathan Greenblatt speaking about the case.
It's common knowledge that the Islamic Republic of Iran is the single largest state sponsor of terror in the world. They're a country whose primary export is anti-Semitism. They, along with Syria and North Korea, must be held accountable for the crimes that they committed.
Nahar Netta, whose mother was murdered by Hamas, said that even though this lawsuit will not erase the pain of that horrific day, he hopes that this lawsuit will bring some comfort and justice to grieving families.
And we want to bring some sort of justice to my mom, to our family, and to other families that are tragically influenced by this horrific act. And that's the reason that we chose to join this civil lawsuit, in order to bring just a little bit of comfort and a little bit of justice to the victims and to the families of the victims of October 7.
The plaintiffs are seeking at least $4 billion in damages under the state-sponsored terrorism fund. However, foreign countries accused of state-sponsored terrorism often do not abide by U.S. rulings brought against them.
And speaking of Iran, it appears that the nation is continuing its sponsorship of the terror group Hezbollah in Lebanon as well. The Iranian regime continues to supply Hezbollah with shipments of weapons as tensions between the terror group and Israel continue to grow. According to Ynet News, among the more significant weapons sent by Iran include anti-aircraft defense systems, which could apparently threaten Israel's current air superiority. Some of their shipments also contain advanced anti-tank missiles, which are based somewhat on Israel's own Spike missile. And this is just the latest in what has been a decades-long supply chain for Hezbollah from its sponsor, Iran. In fact, Israel has attempted to disrupt that supply chain by striking trucks and convoys over the years when it can. All of this also comes as the U.S. continues to try and find a diplomatic solution to the situation between Israel and Hezbollah, hoping to avoid a wider war.
Meanwhile, the IDF has ordered mass evacuations of Palestinians in Khan Yunis, located in southern Gaza. The IDF's orders were a response to 20 rockets fired at Israel from that area. The Islamic Jihad, which is an ally of Hamas, confirmed that they fired rockets at Israeli communities near the Gaza border. Following the attack, residents in eastern Khan Yunis said they received audio messages from Israeli numbers telling them to leave their homes. This comes as Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu said the IDF is almost done eliminating Hamas's military capabilities in the region. At the same time, the IDF also released the head of Al-Shifa Hospital, Dr. Abu Salmiya. Israeli forces detained the doctor for 7 months after he was suspected of running the hospital as a command center for Hamas. According to the BBC, several Israeli politicians and ministers denounced his release, which happened yesterday.
And moving now to the U.S., where Representative Michael McCaul said on Sunday that the Biden administration is still apparently withholding at least 7 weapons systems from Israel.
This is what is most disturbing to me, is that we're withholding weapons systems that I have signed off on and Congress has appropriated with the intent of sending those weapons to Israel. Remember the supplemental? Mm-hmm. They are effectively withholding 7 weapon systems. I can't get into the details. That is not helping Israel.
The chair of the House Foreign Affairs Committee says it's disturbing, as you heard, that the weapons have not been sent, despite being approved by Congress. And this also comes after General Brown, who's the chair of the U.S. Joint Chiefs of Staff, said that it would be difficult for the U.S. to defend Israel against a broader Hezbollah attack. Israeli forces have clashed with the Iranian-backed terrorists nearly daily since the Gaza war began on October 7th.
And Ukraine is trying to bolster its thinly stretched forces by recruiting prisoners. The new program offers convicts parole in exchange for joining the volunteer army. The Ukrainian parliament approved the program last month, and more than 3,000 prisoners have already been assigned to military units since then. One Ukrainian official says the program has already exceeded early expectations. In all, the government estimates that 27,000 potential recruits are sitting in Ukrainian jails. But those convicted of rape, sexual assault, or more than 2 murders are not eligible.
And finally, let's get a look at Hurricane Beryl, which unfortunately has killed at least 1 person after it slammed into the Caribbean island of Carriacou yesterday as a Category 4 storm, and that is in the area of Grenada, by the way. It's since been upgraded to a Category 5 storm with sustained winds nearing 160 miles per hour, according to the National Hurricane Center. This makes it the earliest in the season that a storm has ever been classified at the highest severity level. The dangerous hurricane is nearing Jamaica as it tracks through Central Caribbean, and we ask that you would pray for the island nation tomorrow, which will face torrential downpours, storm surges with the potential for mass flooding and mudslides. And we have more national and political news coming up right after this break, but first, let's go to FISM's Seth Udinsky for a moment in history.
Welcome back to A Moment in History. I'm Seth Udinsky. In this moment in history, let's turn our attention to our first parents, Adam and Eve, and perhaps the most horrific moment in the history of the world. Now, after Adam and Eve were placed by God in the Garden of Eden, they lived in perfect harmony with God and with each other. In Genesis chapter 1 and chapter 2, everything went right, but in Genesis chapter 3, everything went wrong. Let's explore today perhaps the worst moment in the history of the world, the fall of man. Now, in Genesis 3, sometime after the creation of the world several thousand years ago, we are introduced to a new character in the created world. We meet the serpent, and this is not just a random talking snake. This is Satan, the devil, our mortal enemy and the hater of God and his people. We rightly assume that at this point in history, Satan has already rebelled against God and God has cast him down from heaven. So Satan tempted Eve, telling her that she should do what God had commanded her not to do, which was eat the fruit from the tree of the knowledge of good and evil in the Garden of Eden. God had given Adam and Eve total freedom with one simple command. You can eat from the fruit of any tree in the garden except this one. Satan tempted Eve ultimately with the ultimate temptation behind all sin, self-idolatry. He says, if you do this, you will be like God. In other words, you get to be God. You get to be in charge. So Eve listened to the serpent and ate the fruit. Now here we get to a shocking point in the story. Genesis 3 tells us that Adam was there with Eve the whole time. He should have stepped between his wife and the serpent, but he just sat there and watched. And when Eve invited him to sin with her, he joined her and disobeyed God. And so humanity fell. Because we sinned, the perfect relationship we had with God was broken. All evil and calamity in the world today is a result of our sin. Because of sin, there is sadness and hatred and violence and racism and abortion and perversion and scandal and death. Sin brings separation from God. This is obviously something about which we should be ashamed because truthfully, if it was any one of us, we would have done the same thing. But I want you to see and remember that even in this horrible moment in history, God's grace is still on display. He clothes Adam and Eve in their nakedness, and then he punishes Adam, Eve, and the serpent. But look at what happens here. To Adam, he promised that his work would be toilsome and hard. And for thousands of years since, men have toiled in their work for little reward. He also promised death, that we would return to dust, and every human since Adam has died. To Eve, he promised pain in childbirth, and women for centuries have felt the pain of childbirth since. But to the serpent, he promised the most awful curse and simultaneously our greatest hope. God promised that an offspring of Eve would someday come and crush the serpent's head. And friends, Jesus is that offspring. He crushed the serpent's head when he died on the cross and rose again, undoing what Adam did and bringing his people back into right relationship with him. And that is good news indeed. Thanks so much for joining me once again for A Moment in History.
Tragically, and all too often, a young mother in an unplanned pregnancy is in crisis. Pressured from others and without the support of the father of the baby, she feels alone, compelled into making a heartbreaking decision she will regret her whole life. But she is not alone. You can be there for her by giving a life-changing ultrasound through Preborn. Seeing her baby on ultrasound is a game changer, doubling the chances she will choose life from 40% to 80%. For only $28 a month, less than $1 a day, you can show a mom her baby on ultrasound. Your love can save a preborn baby and give a lifetime of joy. Give your tax-deductible gift today. Call pound 250 and say the keyword baby, or donate securely at preborn.org/TV.
Well, in our journey through history, let's explore one of the most famous physical pieces of history in the world. This structure was the original sports arena, as it were, at least in the Western world, and it would serve as a model for modern-age professional sports stadiums. Now, the sports that took place in this stadium, though, were vastly different from baseball or football. They were life and death battles, killing for sport and for entertainment for the Roman aristocracy. To watch more episodes of A Moment in History, go to FISM.tv. What can you tell our listeners about the benefits of being a partner?
It's blessed me with an opportunity to help further the kingdom in a small way, which matters a lot because God takes small things and makes them big. The blessing really has been to be able to take care of my family, but also take care of the kingdom. Going to bed knowing that not only are you correctly managing your investments, but you're doing it in a God-honoring way.
And welcome back to FISM News. I'm Ian Patrick. Let's resume our coverage now with another look at U.S. politics, where the Biden administration faced an energy setback on Monday. A federal judge blocked the president's ban on new exports of liquefied natural gas, while a case on the matter is currently being argued. The decision came after dozens of states sued the Department of Energy over what they called an unconstitutional decision. West Virginia Attorney General Patrick Morrisey, who is one of the plaintiffs, told reporters following the decision that the administration's Energy Department, quote, has no such authority to justify this ban. Authority on matters like this lies with Congress and Congress alone. For context, back in January, the White House announced that it had stopped all new approvals of liquefied natural gas exports to countries that are not part of a free trade agreement, specifically citing environmental concerns. A statement from the Department of Energy said that it disagrees with the ruling as well and will look towards next steps.
And in a new ruling, a federal appeals court found that the Biden administration can move forward with key parts of its student loan relief program. After a federal court in Kansas froze several major parts of the program, an appeals court ruling on Sunday reversed the temporary injunction. This has allowed the White House to move ahead with its plan. The ongoing legal battle surrounds the Saving for a Valuable Education plan, also known as the SAVE plan. It was formulated by the administration as a way to lower monthly student loan payments for borrowers. Under the program, most borrowers would have their payments lowered by half, and others will have their payments lowered to $0 per month. While the court allowed the Department of Education to move forward with the reduced payments plan, the ruling did not overturn the injunction imposed by a Missouri court last week that blocked the department from eventually forgiving certain loans. The SAVE program is one of many federal student debt relief programs that have been challenged in the courts since they were announced by the White House.
And now shifting to some national news here, Border Patrol data is finally showing a decrease in illegal crossings. In fact, it's the lowest amount we've seen in 3 years. According to internal statistics, Border Patrol processed approximately 84,000 migrants who crossed the U.S.-Mexico border, and that's just in the month of June of this year. Aside from being the lowest monthly level since President Biden assumed office in January of 2021, this is also the fourth consecutive monthly drop. For context, Border Patrol apprehensions for the previous 4 months steadily declined from February, which was at 141,000 apprehensions. The reductions also come weeks after President Biden invoked his new border control measure. This measure specifically allows Border Patrol to refuse asylum claims between entry points once daily crossings reach or surpass a certain amount. Senior U.S. officials told CBS News that this measure is the main factor in what we see as a declining number of apprehensions. However, it should be noted that it's only a drop in the bucket when compared to border security measures that former President Donald Trump implemented during his tenure.
And of course, we'll keep watching those numbers to see any fluctuations. And in some other cultural news, the U.S. has the highest rate of youth mortality in the world, and that figure is tragically climbing higher. According to researchers from Virginia Commonwealth University, the average mortality rate from age 0 to 19 is declining in developed countries. But despite being the richest country in the world, America's average began increasing in the early 2010s and hasn't stopped yet. There are nearly 20,000 more young American deaths than in any other enriched countries. The fatalities are driven by suicide attempts, self-harm, and opioid use. CDC data corroborates the research. Nearly 2 million adolescents attempt suicide each year, and it is the second leading cause of death for this age range. The university research reveals that young males are at the greatest risk.
Truly some sobering data there, and certainly something to keep in your prayers, especially those families who are impacted by such tragedies, and for kids who you might happen to know who may be suffering under some of those conditions. And while we would rather not focus on this sort of news for too long, it would be dishonest to discuss youth and infant mortality without at least bringing up abortion. So as for where the process stands in America, a total of 5 states is apparently bringing the question to voters during this year's election. Nevada became the most recent state to put the question of abortion legality to its voters on the ballot. The other states that have done this include Colorado, Maryland, South Dakota, and Florida. Other states are considering doing the same thing, and those include Arizona, Arkansas, and Missouri. New York State, meanwhile, already allows abortions, but is putting a different question to voters to determine if the state should ban discrimination based on what they call pregnancy outcomes and reproductive health care.
And lastly, U.S. Marshals rescued 200 children from sex trafficking and child exploitation after a 6-week national sting. Between May and June, the U.S. Marshals carried out the second Operation We Will Find You in 7 states across the nation. The U.S. Marshals were joined by the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children, who helped locate the missing children. According to the U.S. Marshals press release, 123 children were rescued from dangerous situations, and another 77 were found in safe locations. Out of the 200 children, 173 were endangered runaways and 25 were considered missing. Another 14 children were found near cities where they were reported missing. The youngest of the children was only 5 months old. All right, well, that's our program for today. Thank you so much for joining us, and please visit FISMnews.tv for more content. For any updates until our next show, follow us on social media at FISM News or download the FISM app on your smartphone. Thank you so much, God bless, and we'll see you tomorrow.